January 15th, 1863. Dear Diary, today I hid in a basement while the Transition Council voted on slavery's future. Then Jefferson Davis walked in, and I realized he'd been investigating them too. The past 10 days in Philadelphia had been tense preparation. Samuel and I had tracked Chase's movements, identified council members, and mapped their meeting locations. Elizabeth's contacts had provided intelligence about security, schedules, and attendees. The council's meeting was being held in a private club that presented itself as the Society for African Improvement, a charitable organization supposedly dedicated to helping freed slaves. The irony of using such a name while planning their exploitation wasn't lost on anyone. The meeting starts at 10, Samuel said as we prepared in our boarding house. Chase arrived an hour ago. I've counted at least 20 council members entering the building. And Davis? I asked. The Confederate president's involvement still troubled me. No sign of him yet. But the council members are clearly expecting someone important. There's extra security, formal protocols being observed. This isn't just a planning session. This is something bigger. Samuel had arranged our infiltration through a contact who worked in the building's kitchen. We'd enter through the service entrance, hide in a storage room adjacent to the meeting hall, and observe through a ventilation grate that provided both sound and limited vision. It was cramped, uncomfortable, and risky. Exactly the kind of situation I'd somehow become accustomed to. We entered the building at 9:30, dressed as maintenance workers. Samuel's Underground Railroad contacts had provided authentic uniforms and work orders that would pass casual inspection. We moved through the service corridors with the confidence of people who belonged there. The storage room was in the basement, accessible through a narrow staircase that staff rarely used. Once inside, we positioned ourselves near the ventilation grate. Through the metal slats, I could see into the meeting hall above, an elegant room with a large conference table, expensive furnishings, and the trappings of wealth and power. Council members began gathering at 9:45. I recognized several faces, prominent abolitionists I'd met at social functions, Northern industrialists who'd donated to Republican causes, even a few congressmen whose presence shocked me. And there was Chase, sitting near the head of the table, looking confident and comfortable. My Treasury Secretary, the man I'd trusted with the nation's finances, preparing to vote on how to control millions of freed slaves. At precisely 10 o'clock, an elderly man I didn't recognize called the meeting to order. Gentlemen, thank you for gathering on this important occasion. Today we finalize plans that have been years in development. The implementation of our Freedmen Management System. Over the next 30 minutes, I listened to the most disturbing presentation of my life. The council laid out their complete system. Labor contracts. Freed slaves would be offered employment through council-controlled agencies. The contracts would bind workers for minimum terms of 3 to 5 years, with penalties for early termination including debt obligations and criminal charges. Housing. Segregated communities would be established where freed slaves would rent housing from council-owned companies. Rents would be set high enough to ensure perpetual debt, but not so high as to seem obviously exploitative. Education. Schools would teach basic literacy and job skills, but deliberately avoid subjects like political theory, advanced mathematics, or anything that might make freed slaves too educated for their station. Legal control. State laws would be promoted to criminalize vagrancy, being unemployed. Freed slaves without approved employment could be arrested and forced into convict labor programs, which would conveniently be run by council-connected companies. The beauty of this system, one council member explained, is that it appears benevolent. We're helping these poor people transition to freedom. We're providing jobs, housing, education. No one can accuse us of exploitation when we're offering so much assistance. And the profit margins? Another member asked. Conservative estimates suggest a 20 to 30% return on investment annually. Better than slavery because we don't have the capital costs of ownership or the moral stigma. These are voluntary contracts with free people, completely legal, completely defensible. But then Chase spoke, and what he said was even worse than I'd feared. Gentlemen, I've spoken with President Lincoln about Reconstruction policy. He's receptive to the idea of a federal Freedmen's Bureau to coordinate assistance for former slaves. I believe I can ensure that Bureau is structured to support our initiatives. Can you guarantee federal funding for our programs? Someone asked. Not guarantee, but strongly influence. As Treasury Secretary, I control which organizations receive federal contracts and support. If our affiliated charities are the primary providers of freedmen's services, the federal government will naturally channel resources through us. So Chase planned to use government money to fund the council's exploitation. Taxpayers would finance a system that kept freed slaves in economic bondage, all while thinking they were supporting humanitarian aid. There is one complication, Chase continued. President Lincoln is more sympathetic to freed slaves than I'd prefer. He occasionally speaks of land redistribution, of giving freed slaves the means for economic independence. We need to manage his expectations. How do you propose to do that? The elderly chairman asked. By presenting our system as the responsible, practical alternative to radical redistribution schemes. By showing that freed slaves aren't ready for land ownership, that they need guidance and structure. By making our controlled system seem like moderate, sensible policy compared to impractical idealism. I felt sick listening to Chase discuss manipulating me, using my own idealism against my goals. He understood exactly how to frame exploitation as pragmatism, how to make bondage sound like assistance. The meeting continued with detailed discussions of implementation timelines, financial projections, and political strategies for gaining congressional support. Every word confirmed Samuel's worst warnings about the council's plans. But then, at 11:30, the door opened and Jefferson Davis entered, and the atmosphere in the room completely changed. Davis was accompanied by two men I recognized as Confederate officials. He looked calm, composed, and utterly in control as he surveyed the room full of Northern Council members. "Mr. Davis," the chairman said, standing, "we're honored by your presence. Please sit. We have much to discuss about post-war cooperation." "Indeed we do," Davis said, but he remained standing. Though perhaps not the cooperation you were expecting. The room went silent. Something in Davis's tone suggested this wasn't going to be the collaborative meeting the council had planned. "I've been investigating your organization for 6 months," Davis continued calmly. "Your agents approached Confederate officials with promises of maintaining Southern economic systems even after military defeat. You offered to help us preserve plantation economics through labor management that would keep freed slaves working for former masters. Mr. Davis, I assure you." The chairman began, but Davis cut him off. "I initially thought your proposals might have merit. The transition from slavery to freedom is complex. Perhaps some structure, some guidance would be beneficial." My heart sank. Was Davis about to support the council after all? "But then I spoke with freed slaves who'd escaped to Union territory," Davis continued. "I heard their stories. I learned about your voluntary contracts that are anything but voluntary. I saw your maps of segregated communities that look remarkably like concentration camps. And I understood that you're not trying to help anyone. You're trying to profit from human suffering." The room erupted in protests and denials. Davis waited for silence, then pulled out documents from his coat. "These are copies of your own correspondence discussing profit margins from freed slave labor. These are your financial projections showing returns on human capital investments. These are your plans to use federal resources to implement a system that's slavery in everything but name. Where did you get those documents?" Chase demanded, his face pale. "From people within your own organization who were horrified by what you're planning. Not everyone in the Transition Council is a cynical exploiter, Mr. Chase. Some genuinely believe they were helping freed slaves, and when they learned the truth, they chose conscience over profit. So there was a faction within the council that opposed its direction, just like there had been with the foundation. People who joined thinking they were doing good, who'd realized they were participating in evil, and who'd decided to fight back. Mr. Davis, the chairman said carefully, even if everything you say is true, what do you intend to do about it? You're the president of a nation fighting for its survival. You need allies, resources, support for reconstruction. We can provide all of that. At what cost? The souls of 4 million people you want to exploit. We're offering a practical solution to an impossible problem, another council member argued. What's your alternative? Give freed slaves land they don't know how to farm? Education they're not prepared for? Freedom they can't handle? Davis's response revealed something I'd never expected from the Confederate president. My alternative is to give freed slaves what they've earned through centuries of unpaid labor. The opportunity to build their own futures without interference from people who think they know what's best for them. The room went silent. Jefferson Davis, the president of a nation founded to preserve slavery, was advocating for genuine freedom for freed slaves. I've spent months learning about the economics of slavery, Davis continued. Not the propaganda we told ourselves about benevolent institutions and civilizing missions, but the real economics. Slavery was always about profit maximized through human suffering. Your system is the same exploitation with a different legal structure. You're a hypocrite, Chase said angrily. You've defended slavery your entire career, and now you lecture us about exploitation? I am a hypocrite, Davis admitted. I've defended the indefensible for decades. I convinced myself that slavery was different from other forms of bondage, that Southern slavery was somehow more humane than other systems. I was wrong, and I'm trying, perhaps too late, to prevent that same evil from continuing under a new name. Why, someone asked. Why betray your own region's economic interests? Because I've seen what slavery has done to the South, not just to slaves, but to the entire society. It's poisoned our culture, corrupted our values, and ultimately led us into a war we're losing. I won't participate in creating that same poison again, even if it profits the people around this table. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jefferson Davis, my enemy, the man leading the fight to preserve slavery, was advocating for freed slaves more strongly than many Northern abolitionists. Samuel, crouched beside me, whispered, "Do you think he's sincere, or is this manipulation?" I thought about my meeting with Davis in Richmond during our fight against the Foundation. He'd been genuine then, willing to ally against a common threat despite our differences. Was this the same man, fighting the same kind of conspiracy? He's sincere, I whispered back. I don't know how or why he changed, but he means this. The chairman's voice turned cold. Mr. Davis, you're making a serious mistake. The Transition Council has resources you can't imagine. We can make your reconstruction impossible. We can ensure the South remains devastated for generations. We can turn Northern public opinion against any accommodation with the Confederacy. Then do it, Davis said calmly. I'd rather see the South remain poor, but morally redeemable, than prosper through exploitation that perpetuates the same evil that led us into this war. You're throwing away your nation's future for sentiment about slaves. I'm throwing away your profits for human dignity. There's a difference. But then the chairman revealed the council's ultimate leverage, and it made everything more dangerous. Mr. Davis, before you make any final decisions, you should know, we have evidence of your communications with President Lincoln, your secret meeting in Richmond, your cooperation against the Foundation, your continued correspondence about shared threats. Davis's expression didn't change, but I felt my stomach drop. They knew about our alliance. They had proof. If you oppose us, the chairman continued, we'll release that evidence publicly. The Confederacy will see you as a traitor who conspired with the enemy. You'll be removed from power, possibly executed for treason. And the same evidence will destroy Lincoln's credibility in the North, the president who secretly cooperated with rebels while Americans died fighting them. It was the same tactic the Foundation had used, threatened to destroy both presidents by exposing their cooperation. Turn our greatest strength against a common enemy into evidence of betrayal. Do what you must, Davis said, but I won't support your system. And I suspect that when the American people, North and South, see the details of what you're planning, they'll care less about secret presidential meetings and more about organizations trying to perpetuate slavery under a different name. You're gambling with your presidency, Chase warned. I've been gambling with my presidency since I took office. At least this time I'm gambling for something worthwhile. I'd heard enough. The council was threatening to expose our alliance to destroy both presidencies. Davis was standing firm despite the threat, and I was hiding in a basement instead of standing beside him. That had to change. Samuel, I whispered, I'm going up there. What? Mr. President, you can't. I can't let Davis face this alone. He's fighting for freed slaves when he should be my enemy. The least I can do is fight beside him. Before Samuel could stop me, I stood and moved toward the basement stairs. I heard Samuel following, probably planning to tackle me before I could make a terrible mistake. I walked into the meeting hall through the main door, still wearing my maintenance worker disguise. The room fell completely silent as I entered. Good morning, gentlemen, I said, removing my cap. I apologize for the informal attire, but I didn't receive a proper invitation to this meeting. The shock on their faces would have been comical in any other circumstance. Chase looked like he might faint. The chairman was frozen in place. Several council members reached for weapons they weren't carrying. "Mr. President," Davis said, a slight smile crossing his face. "I was wondering if you were going to stay hidden all morning." "You knew I was here?" I asked. "I recognized your breathing pattern through the ventilation grate. We spent enough time together in Richmond that I'd know it anywhere." So Davis had known I was observing the entire time. He'd made his stand knowing I was watching, perhaps hoping I'd reveal myself. "How long have you two been conspiring?" the chairman demanded. "We're not conspiring," I said. "We're enemies who occasionally recognize threats that transcend our conflict. The Transition Council is such a threat." "Two presidents, one meeting," Chase said, his voice shaking with anger and fear. "This proves everything we suspected. You've been working together all along, manipulating both sides." "We've been working separately toward the same goal," Davis corrected. "True freedom for freed slaves. Not the controlled exploitation your council is planning." I pulled out the notebook I'd been writing in during the meeting, pages of detailed notes documenting everything I'd heard. "I have evidence of everything discussed today. Your labor contracts, your segregated communities, your plans to criminalize unemployment, your scheme to control the Freedmen's Bureau. All documented in your own words." But then Chase revealed something that showed how deep the conspiracy went. "You think exposing us stops anything?" Chase said, recovering his composure. "The council has members in Congress, in state legislatures, in military commands on both sides. We've been building this infrastructure for years. Even if you reveal our Philadelphia leadership, the system continues." "He's right," the chairman added. "We're not a conspiracy you can defeat by arresting a few leaders. We're a network of interests, financial, political, social, that spans the entire country. Freed slaves will need jobs, housing, education. We'll be the ones providing it, whether you approve or not. And when freed slaves have no other options, they'll accept our terms. That's not exploitation, that's market economics." They were right about one thing. This wasn't a conspiracy we could defeat by exposing leadership. The council represented systemic interests, economic forces that would continue even if these specific individuals were removed. "Then we build alternatives," I said. "Government programs that provide real help without controlling contracts. Land redistribution that gives freed slaves economic independence. Education systems that aren't designed to keep people in their station. We compete with your exploitation by offering genuine freedom." "With what money?" someone challenged. "The government is bankrupt from war. You can't fund massive aid programs." "Then we'll find the money. Reparations from Confederate assets. Taxes on wealth built through slavery. Federal land grants. We'll find ways to fund genuine assistance instead of your controlled system. And the Confederacy will contribute," Davis said, shocking everyone, including me. "When this war ends, and it will end with Union victory, the South will have a choice. Accept genuine Reconstruction that includes freed slave economic independence, or accept Transition Council control that perpetuates exploitation. I'd rather impoverish the South through reparations than enrich it through continued bondage." The chairman laughed bitterly. "You're both idealists fighting economic reality. Freed slaves represent labor supply. Northern industries need workers. Southern plantations need farmers. We're simply connecting supply and demand efficiently. Efficiently for your profits," Davis shot back. "Not efficiently for human dignity." "This meeting is over," I said. "The council is exposed. Your plans are documented. And two presidents, enemy presidents, are united in opposing you. That alliance will be difficult to dismiss as conspiracy when we both go public with what you're planning. You'll destroy each other," Chase warned. "The public will never forgive cooperation between enemies." "Perhaps," I admitted. "But they'll forgive it more easily than they'll forgive organizations trying to enslave freed people under new names. And between my presidency and genuine freedom for millions, I choose freedom." "As do I," Davis added. The chairman stood slowly. "Very well. You've won this round. But the council has been operating for decades. We'll adapt, rebuild, continue under different names. You can't stop economic forces that powerful." "Maybe not," I said. "But we can expose them. Make sure the American people understand what's being done in the name of helping freed slaves. Trust that when people know the truth, they'll choose justice over exploitation." That's naive, Chase said. Probably. But it's the only option that lets me sleep at night. Samuel appeared at the door, along with several freed slaves who'd been working with him to document the council. Gentlemen, I believe it's time for the presidents to depart. We have reporters outside who are very interested in hearing about this meeting. The council members looked panicked. Public exposure was their nightmare. Their entire system depended on appearing benevolent while being exploitative. Wait, the chairman said desperately. Perhaps we can negotiate. Modify our approach. Incorporate your concerns. No negotiation, Davis said firmly. Your system is fundamentally corrupt. No modification makes it acceptable. As we left the building, I walked alongside Jefferson Davis, my enemy, my unexpected ally, my fellow fighter for something neither of us had expected to defend together. This will destroy us both politically, Davis said quietly. Probably. But you're doing it anyway. Are you? I am. We parted at the building's entrance, Davis returning to Confederate territories, me returning to Washington. Enemy presidents who'd fought together for genuine freedom, knowing the political cost would be severe. January 16, 1863. Dear Diary, yesterday, I stood beside Jefferson Davis and fought the Transition Council. Today, I face the political consequences. The story of our Philadelphia meeting is spreading. Northern newspapers are shocked that I cooperated with the Confederate president. Southern newspapers are calling Davis a traitor. Both sides are questioning whether we can be trusted to lead our respective nations. But we also accomplished something important. The Transition Council is exposed. Their plans are documented. Their system of controlled exploitation is public knowledge. Will it be enough? I don't know. The council is right that they represent powerful economic interests that won't disappear just because we've exposed one organization. The desire to exploit vulnerable people, to maximize profit regardless of human cost, that's not a conspiracy. It's a feature of how some people think about economics. But at least now the fight is in the open. Freed slaves know what they're up against. People of conscience understand what's at stake. And two presidents, despite being enemies, have shown that some principles transcend political divisions. Samuel tells me that freed slave communities are organizing, creating their own mutual aid networks that don't depend on council-controlled organizations. Elizabeth reports that genuine abolitionists are creating alternative assistance programs. Mary's intelligence network is tracking council activities to prevent them from rebuilding in secret. The fight continues, but it continues with the truth exposed, with freed slaves empowered to resist, with leaders willing to sacrifice political capital for genuine freedom. Tomorrow, I meet with Congress about the Freedmen's Bureau. Thanks to our exposure of the council, the bill will be structured differently, with oversight, accountability, and freed slave representation in decision-making. It's not perfect, but it's better than the council's version would have been. The candle burns bright tonight, illuminating pages that document the ongoing struggle for real freedom. Emancipation was just the beginning. The true fight, ensuring freedom means something real, has only started. But the council's exposure triggered a violent backlash I hadn't anticipated. Organizations forming to terrorize freed slaves into accepting exploitation, using fear where manipulation had failed.